Welcome back on board the Starship. I'm talking to Muad'Dib, and we're talking about the story of the Ark of the Covenant and well, it's known as the Stone of Scone now. But tell us what the name of the stone.
It's
the correct name of the stone.
It's known as Jacob's Pillar.
Jacob's Pillar.
But the stone became the throne of David, and King David, King Solomon, his son Rehoboam, and all the descendants, all of the monarchs descended from David, were crowned on that stone, on Bethel, Jacob's Pillar.
And how many years were you talking about? Hundreds of years?
Well, yeah. David was around about 1000 BC, and the temple was destroyed in 588. King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon destroyed the temple in 588 BC. And Jeremiah the Bible prophet took the stone from the temple and the Ark of the Covenant and some of the treasures from the temple, golden treasures, put them in the Ark. Not the stone in the Ark.
Not the stone in the Ark.
But the other stuff.
Right.
And took the king's daughters and some other people down into Tanis in Egypt. And that's why the film Raiders of the Lost Ark begins in Tanis in Egypt, looking for the Ark of the Covenant. And when they got to Tanis in Egypt, the Pharaoh, who had been an ally of King Zedekiah of Jerusalem against King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon, gave Jeremiah and gave the daughters of Zedekiah, the princesses, gave them a palace at Tanis, and the remains of it are still there today. It's known in Arabic as Qasir bint al-Yahudi, which means the palace of the daughters of Judah. And they lived there for a number of years until Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon had pacified Judea. What he did was he destroyed the temple, and he took all of the inhabitants, apart from a very small remnant who could be like caretakers of the land. He took the majority of them into Babylon as slaves. So they were told to leave, and they left Tanis in Egypt. And they got a ship from Tanis and sailed through the Mediterranean.
This is with the stone and the Ark?
With the stone and the Ark of the Covenant.
Right, so
yes.
this is where...
And the king's eldest daughter, who was called Teotefi.
So it comes up from Egypt to the Mediterranean.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, I interviewed a historian called Alan Wilson, and he believes that, that the Ark came up to... He believes that it ended up in Wales after it came up, to, from the Mediterranean.
Yeah.
So take it from there as to what research you've done as to where you think it was taken.
It came through the Straits of Gibraltar. They stopped at Gibraltar for 5 months, changed ships, and then eventually, because they had to wait for the weather and the currents and things, and they sailed up and they stopped off in northern Spain and spent some time there.
Can I just interrupt you there, Muad'Dib? It seems likely that the Ark of the Covenant could be in the British Isles if the Stone of Destiny ended up here.
Absolutely.
And the two were supposedly together.
Yeah.
What's the evidence that they were moved together? I mean, what documentation actually explains this, that they were kept together out of Israel? Sorry, out of Egypt.
Out of Egypt.
Is that accepted knowledge?
It's in the Bible.
It's in the Bible.
It's in the Bible that the pillar and the ark were there at the time of Jeremiah. So we can discount the theory that the Ark of the Covenant is in Axum in Ethiopia. Okay.
So it comes up to Northern Europe.
Yes.
Tell us what happens then. Did it land in Cornwall, or you believe?
First of all, yes. When they were sailing from Spain and they were heading for Ireland, a storm blew up for a week and broke the oars and the rudder, and they couldn't steer the boat, so that only God could steer the boat. And he steered the boat where he wanted it to go, which was into Penzance Bay. In Penzance Bay, there's an island, a small island that you can walk out to at low tide, called St. Michael's Mount. And next to it, on the shore, is a small town called Marazion. Or
Marazion.
Marazion. Yes, exactly.
Zion.
Yeah. Well, the ruler of Cornwall at that time was called Elatha, and they knew that they were part of the 10 lost tribes of Israel, and that Britain, including Ireland, at that time, the descendants of Dan, who was one of the 12 tribes of Israel, the father of one of the 12 tribes of Israel, populated Ireland, the Danites. And in Ireland, they were known as the Tuatha Dé Danann, which means the tribe of Dan. Okay, but in Cornwall, Elatha was the ruler there, and they knew that they were Israelites. And when Jeremiah, and the boat was blown into their location, and Jeremiah, and she had then become the queen. Teotefi was the elder daughter of King Zedekiah of Jerusalem. But once he had, and his sons had all been killed, they all died in Babylon, she then became the Queen of Israel. And so when Jeremiah and the Queen of Israel, Teotefi, landed at Marazion, they told Elatha about the fall of Jerusalem, the destruction of Solomon's temple, and all that had happened. And he wept bitterly over the fall of Zion. And Mara means bitter, and Zion is Jerusalem. So it means, the word Marazion means bitter over Jerusalem.
Hence the name of that island in Cornwall.
Well, the island is called St. Michael's Mount,
Right.
but it's right next to Marazion.
Okay.
And you know, why would a place in Cornwall have a Hebrew name?
Right. Now, after arriving in Cornwall, this
Yeah.
party with you believe had the ark and the stone.
Yeah.
Somehow you believe that they then went to Ireland.
Yes, they were headed for Ireland, and so Elatha sent messengers across to Ireland, to Tara, to the High King of Ireland, who was called Eochaid, and asked if they would have safe passage and if they would be looked after once they arrived in Ireland, and that there would be no funny business. And Eochaid, who was the High King of Ireland at Tara, when he got the message, recognized it as the fulfillment of a vision that he'd been given as a small boy. The vision that he was given was that he must not marry, even if he reached middle age, because one day his queen would come from the east. And so Elatha sent an armada of ships and soldiers to make absolutely sure that she was safe. Anyway, she arrived at Tara and she married Eochaid, the High King of Ireland.
So can I interrupt there?
In
Is
583
this would a classical historian agree with that, or is that this queen landed in Tara with the stone?
There are legends in Ireland, yes, about this.
Right.
And about an old man coming with a box,
Right.
which is the ark, and a stone, and the princess and all of that, or the queen, and the marriage and all of that. Yes,
Right.
that's in the records. And they were married over the coronation stone, the Stone of Destiny, on the inauguration mound at Tara, on the hill of Tara, on the 21st of June of 583 BC. Jeremiah came with the ark in a separate boat. And in Ireland at that time, there were all little kingdoms, like warlords, and they were all busy fighting each other. There was a war, and the people who wanted God's law implemented in Ireland were vastly outnumbered, but they defeated the others. And once it was safe, then Jeremiah came with the Ark of the Covenant, and they built what we would today term a university on the hill of Tara. It was called the School of the Olam, and there they taught God's law, the Torah, at this university. And all of the major families in Ireland would send their firstborn, their eldest son, to Tara to be taught the Torah, the law. And that's why the hill became known the Hill of the Torah, or Tara. It is now the Hill of Tara, but that's a corruption of the word Torah.
And you believe the ark was put underneath that hill?
Yes, yeah.
Right. And was the stone with the ark at that point? Or?
No, the stone, well, they were both on the Hill of Tara, of Torah, but the stone was kept on the inauguration mound so
Right.
that all of the kings of Ireland could be crowned on it, just as David and Solomon and
Yeah,
All
sure.
of their descendants have been crowned on it, including Tia Tephi. They made an underground chamber on the hill of Torah in which to place the Ark of the Covenant for its safety.
You mentioned something to me the other day about how you've almost triangulated the fact that it's that you, to sort of back up what you're saying, that
Yeah.
it was south of something and west of something else.
Northeast.
Just tell us about that, because
Yeah, well, people argue about the fact that it's not there and this, that and the other, because in 1898 some people calling themselves the British Israelites went to the hill of Tara and started digging, but they were digging in the wrong place. They had one clue, and you cannot pinpoint a location unless you have 3 coordinates. And they only had one clue, which was that the Ark of the Covenant was buried in the south of the Rath of the Synods. The Rath is a ring fort. And so they started digging in the southern side of the Rath of the Synods. Of course, they didn't find it because it wasn't there. They only had that one clue. It wasn't buried in the south of the Rath of the Synods. At that time, in the language that was used, in the south of something meant to the south of something.
in the south of something.
Yeah, and
right.
so that one clue, it was in the south of the Rath of the Synods. Well, from the Rath of the Synods to the right down to the southern coast of Ireland is technically in the south of,
Right.
of the Rath of the Synods.
But somewhere south of that point, you believe?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. And so what you need is 3 coordinates to cross, to pinpoint
Yeah,
something.
sure.
And I researched the ancient Irish documents.
There is somebody who's written a book some years ago claiming that it's in Tara.
Yeah, yeah.
What's that author's name?
E. Raymond Capt, and the book is called Jacob's Pillar.
Right. So he placed it there as well.
Yes, he did, but he didn't know exactly how to get to it.
All right. So carry on with this triangulation.
Yeah, okay.
thing.
So she was buried, the Ark was buried, and then the tomb was sealed until her death, and then it was opened. She was placed in with the Ark, and then it was resealed, and nobody's been in there since. And we're talking about, 2,500 years. But in one of the ancient Irish documents, it says that she was buried northeast of the Forad. And the Forad is the Gaelic word for the inauguration mound. Okay, so the Rath of the Synods is here. The inauguration mound and Forad is here. Okay, and it says that she was buried northeast. South of the Rath of the Synods is the Mound of Hostages, okay, which is also northeast from the inauguration mound, okay. And then in another one of the ancient Irish documents, it says that after her husband had buried her, he raised a mound over her, which is 60 feet by 60 feet, which is their way of saying it was a circle, and it was 60 feet in diameter, because it was the same across. And the Mound of the Hostages on the hill of Tara is south of the Rath of the Synods. It is northeast of the inauguration mound, and it is, or was at the time it was built, approximately 60 feet in diameter. So that tells us that that is the actual location. What happened was that they dug out, and then they built a stone chamber completely under the ground. And then all the earth that they'd excavated to make that underground chamber, they then used to make the mound over the top of it. And they did that for 2 reasons. First of all, the first reason was to be a decoy, that if anybody started to look, they would probably start digging in the mound.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, which would be the decoy, because it wasn't in the mound, it's under the mound. And the second reason was that it would permanently mark the spot for all time, which it's done.
Okay, so at some point the stone gets separated from the ark and finds its way.
At that point it got separated. Jeremiah the Bible prophet, once he'd built, seen to the building of the school of the Olam, the university, to teach the law, to teach the Torah, and he taught it to Tia Tephi's husband, the High King of Ireland, so that it had royal patronage, if you like. He then died after they'd buried the Ark of the Covenant, and his job was done, because he was an old man by that time, and he died on the 21st of September of 581 BC, and he was buried in a stone cairn at Loch Crew, and it's now called Cairn T. There's a number of cairns there, and they've given them letters to identify them.
Right.
And this particular one is Cairn T, and inside it there are 35 stones with what we would call hieroglyphics on. Mm-hmm. And the second stone on the left in the entrance to Cairn T is what I call Jeremiah's journey stone, and written in stone is the story of Jeremiah going to Egypt and then going to Gibraltar, the journey, and yeah, all of that to coming to Ireland. It's all written in stone, along with astronomical hieroglyphics by which you can date when these things happened.
Right. Now, I know that you've approached the Irish authorities and tried to get them to excavate that site, but they don't really want to know.
The Hill of Tara, yes,
Hill of Tara.
Not the not Cairn T.
Now, the stone, if we can just follow the path of that
Yeah,
ends up
yeah.
on an island between Scotland and Ireland at some point.
Yes.
Gets
What
taken.
happened? Yeah. What happened was that all of the descendants of Iachade and Tia Tefi for 1,000 years were crowned on the inauguration mound on the Stone of Destiny, Jacob's Pillar, Bethel.
In Tara.
In Tara, okay. Until 500 AD, when the High King of Ireland at that time was called Murdoch, and he had a younger brother called Fergus. And during the preceding centuries, a lot of the Irish people from the north of Ireland had migrated across to Argyll, what is today Argyllshire, to Scotland, and started to live there. And they were known as the Irish Scots. Most people are probably unaware that in the time of the Romans, Ireland was called the Island of the Scots,
Right.
by the Romans, okay? Because the people were descended, Iachade was descended from Scota, from where we get the word Scota. What happened was that because Fergus was the younger brother of Murdoch, he couldn't rule in Ireland, so he went across to Argyllshire. The two sides were known as the Western Dalriada was the north of Ireland, and the Eastern Dalriada was Argyllshire. And so he went across to Argyllshire and wanted to be the ruler, because he was the prince, wanted to be the ruler over the Irish Scots in Argyllshire. And he knew they wouldn't recognise him as the king unless he was crowned on the stone, the coronation stone. So he borrowed the coronation stone from his brother at Tara, and he took it to Donad in Argyllshire. And there he was crowned Fergus More, which means Fergus the Great, the first king of the Irish Scots. And he then built a chapel on the island of Iona, which is off the west coast of Scotland. Built a chapel, and the stone was then placed. He didn't send it back to Ireland, to his brother at Tara. He placed it in the chapel.
So it's now on the island of Iona.
At this point, it's on the island of Iona. Columba is known as Saint Columba. He went to the chapel that his uncle Fergus had built to house the stone, and he used the stone as his pillow, just as Jacob had used it thousands of years before. And he also had visions using it as his pillow. And there is actually a book, he wrote down the visions. Right. And there's actually a book called the Prophecies of Columba, or Columkill as they call him in Ireland.
Okay. Well, we're just going to go for another break, Marty.
Okay.
And we still the stone still isn't on the mainland yet, but we'll talk about that after this break.